everyone. Welcome to another episode of Weather Extra. I'm First Alert meteorologist Jillian Johnson. It was a busy week out in the Atlantic as another named storm brought devastating impacts to a few islands. We kick off this week's show by taking a look at Ernesto. Ernesto strengthened into a tropical storm back on Monday, August 12th. Ernesto was the fifth named storm of the season and would eventually strengthen into a hurricane by late Wednesday morning. Ernesto became the third hurricane of the 2024 Atlantic season, which is actually about 3.5 weeks ahead of schedule, according to the National Hurricane Center. Now, Ernesto continued to gain strength and would eventually become a strong Category 2 hurricane as it moved towards Bermuda as we made our way into the end of the week. Now, Hurricane Ernesto left a trail of devastation across Puerto Rico. The storm raked across the island, flooding parts of the U.S. Commonwealth and left hundreds of thousands of people in the dark. Here's how things looked in Puerto Rico last week as Ernesto pulled away.
After Hurricane Ernesto lashed Puerto Rico with heavy rains and powerful winds, water stretched as far as the eye could see in Toa Baja Wednesday as the La Plata River overflowed its banks. In the coastal city of Fajardo, flooding overtook some neighborhoods, with debris, fallen trees, and downed power lines littering the streets. Even after crews began restoring electricity, energy provider Luma said roughly 560,000 people, more than a third of customers, were without power across Puerto Rico by the end of the day. The island's grid is still being repaired 7 years after it was wiped out by Hurricane Maria. In Culebra, Carlos Francisco and his family were cleaning up after Ernesto blew the roof off their home. It was like a roaring lion, his wife Cynthia Nazario said. I had never gone through anything like that before. Ernesto's trail of waterlogged damage posed some complications Wednesday, as in the municipality of Cabo Rojo, where emergency personnel worked to clear a blocked road so an ambulance could take someone to the hospital. Fear over the severe conditions prompted some people to evacuate, like Yesenia Adorno, who came to the shelter near San Juan with her dogs as the water rose behind her home.
How has this been?
Miedo.
Fear.
Miedo. Lloramos.
You cried.
On some parts of the island over the last 2 days, nearly a foot of rain has fallen. Well, now that Ernesto has moved on, we're about to lose the cloud cover, and it's expected to be a hot, sunny day in the 90s as many people are still hoping that their power will be restored. Manuel Bojorquez, CBS News, Dorado, Puerto Rico.
While Ernesto did not impact the mainland of the United States, there have been a few storms to hit U.S. coastal cities so far this season. Hurricane Beryl marched its way right through the Lone Star State and is so far the strongest storm of the 2024 season. The National Weather Service out of Houston released their official report on Beryl last week, and for more on that, we turn to First Alert meteorologist Sean Bellafury.
The latest update from NOAA for the upcoming or current hurricane season, I should say, has been released, and we'll get into some of those numbers in just a second. But first, I want to point out we're going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Beryl, and if you want to take a deep dive into this information, go to weather.gov/HGX. That's the Weather Service office in Houston's webpage. You click on the Hurricane Beryl list, and it'll take you to a page that has a couple of different PDF files all about Hurricane Beryl. First off, we're going to take a look at some of the highest land wind speeds. Now, these are in knots, not miles per hour. Knots are lower than miles per hour. So when we're talking a 74-knot wind gust at Surfside Beach, that's closer to about 82, 83 miles per hour. The highest sustained wind, Surfside Beach, 56 knots, which is just around 60 miles per hour. So even though these sustained winds weren't to hurricane force strength, those gusts definitely were. And now, as we continue to scroll down, of course, the marine wind gusts were a lot higher. Highest wind gust offshore Freeport Harbor was 63.5 knots and going down from there. I do want to point out the rainfall totals, though, because this is really one of the most interesting ones. We were talking a lot about Hurricane Beryl and its mostly rain impacts, and that verified. Near Thompson's, Texas, rainfall measured at 14.99 inches. That was the highest rainfall total measured in Houston's area. Even in Houston itself, a report of 13.55 inches inches of rain. And as we take a look at the sea level pressure, lower pressure means lower pressure, and that means stronger winds. The lowest recorded was in Matagorda Bay, 978.8 millibars. So what's going to happen for the rest of the hurricane season? It's going to be active. Here's the latest forecast from NOAA. Now, the preseason outlook was for 17 to 25 named storms, and the new update has 17 to 24, so knocking one off of that higher end of the scale. But you can still see numerous amounts of hurricanes and major hurricanes are expected over the coming weeks. And we could start to see the next seeds for tropical storms coming off of Africa. Notice all these showers and thunderstorms that have formed over the past week. Those will eventually move off the coast and become potential tropical systems. We do have Hurricane Ernesto that's going to be impacting Bermuda this weekend. But what happens behind that? Well, from August 21st to August 27th, the Tropical Hazards Outlook from the Climate Prediction Center shows some of those thunderstorm seeds becoming potentially a tropical system next week. Greater than 40% chance of tropical development. And as we look closer to September 3rd, the week ending in September 3rd, we're talking at a greater than 60% chance of tropical development. We'll, of course, keep our eyes on it for you. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
Triple-digit heat has been the major weather story here in Central Texas. For the past few weeks, we've had heat advisories in effect. For more on the difference between heat advisories and heat warnings and some very important heat safety tips, we bring in First Alert meteorologist C.D. Finley.
Well, in periods like this where it seems the heat is pretty much impossible to stop, it's important to know all the lingo when it comes to heat advisory versus heat warning. There are two very different definitions to this. A heat advisory is issued when there are 2 or more days of consistent temperatures of 103 or greater, or the heat index is at 105 or greater, aka heat index is also known as the feels like temperatures. And this is pretty normal for a Texas summer, especially a central Texas summer. We've seen plenty of heat advisories over the last few weeks, but the next step up from that is an excessive heat watch or an excessive heat warning. This is issued when 2 days of highs at 105 or greater, or at least a heat index of 110. This is a little bit less frequently used, but it is possible, especially when the temperatures get up that high. So in terms of heat safety, this is, pretty typical stuff. Make sure you never leave your kids or pets unattended in vehicles. Drink plenty of water, and make sure you have plenty of shade and AC, and wear light colored and loose fitted clothing when it is really hot outside, especially for this time of year.
2024 could be the hottest year on record, and you may be wondering how these extreme temperatures impact our body. We'll have more on that when we return. Welcome back to Weather Extra. We know here in Central Texas that the heat has been on these past few weeks. And despite a slightly less hot July here at home and across the globe, 2024 is still on track to be the hottest year on record. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service says last month wasn't as hot as July 2023, but it was the second warmest July on record, ending the streak of global monthly temperature records that's been going on for more than a year. Despite a slightly less hot July, 2 days last month were the hottest since record keeping started in 1940. Sea surface temperatures also marked the second highest July on record. They were just 0.01 degrees Celsius below 2023 levels. And as heat records continue to be broken across the globe, it's important to understand how the extreme heat affects our bodies. CNN's Laura Patterson hops into a heat chamber to find out.
Everything that's going on with my body made that hard. We're here at the University of South Wales in the UK, and behind me here is an environmental chamber where scientists can control the temperature. And so they're going to crank the temperatures up to about 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And the whole point of this exercise is to see what impact extreme heat has on my body. This on my head is measuring brain blood flow. Here is measuring skin temperature on my leg. They're going to be looking at cognitive functions, like how is my decision making affected by the heat? We need to understand what it's going to be like living in a much hotter world.
Okay, Laura, so you're fully instrumented, you're ready for action, ready for liftoff.
It's 40 degrees now, 20% humidity, and I can really feel it starting to sweat. My face is getting very hot. My skin temperature's gone up by a couple of degrees.
Doing a really good job here.
It's 40 degrees Celsius, but it's 85% humidity, and the difference is intense. It's like a sauna in here. This is really, really tough. Like, hands feel a bit shaky. Everything feels tiring. Even breathing feels weird.
Stop. Great job.
Thank you.
Mission accomplished, so it's not easy. Now, you've got a markedly depressed increase in exercise-induced blood flow to the brain. It's gone from 600 milliliters per minute to 400.
That's really significant.
Which is huge. You're not getting enough fuel into the brain, you're not burning enough fuel to be able to make the right decisions. You would make potentially wrong decisions, rash decisions, and a much larger increase in pressure during exercise. So your heart is working a lot harder, probably about 30% harder, just because of that increase in temperature and humidity. Older patients, you know, this is a big deal for them. And they wouldn't be able to do the simplest tasks, even stand up to get out of a chair. From a cardiovascular perspective, that would just be too demanding.
We're seeing now around the world is this really humid heat that is pushing places to the limits of survivability. We're seeing stronger heat waves, more humid weather, and the impacts on the body are pretty overwhelming.
Now, this record-breaking heat has intensified potential health hazards for people with outdoor jobs. But a North Texas construction company says it had no serious heat illnesses so far this year with the help of wearable technology. CBS's news environmental correspondent David Xtra shows how supervisors closely monitor their employees while outside in this dangerous heat.
First time I came to Dallas was June of 2008.
In Ross Daly's homeland of Scotland, summer means 60-degree temperatures.
Does being from Scotland give you a special appreciation for the risks of the heat here in Texas?
Back home, if it got to this temperature, we'd be shutting the job sites down because it's too hot.
As a construction safety officer, he uses technology to protect his workers from the heat. They wear this smartwatch.
So you have people out there who are saying, I see my body's too hot, I'm going to take a little break here.
When a worker's body temperature rises above 100 degrees, the supervisor is alerted so they can help the worker avoid serious heat illness.
And you really don't know you're coming down with heat illness until the symptoms come on. And at that point, it's kind of a little bit late.
When it went off, it was a little scary to me because I didn't think anything was happening to me.
Tyler Hughes learned intervention is critical as climate change makes working outdoors in the summer even hotter.
My superintendent at the time and the safety guy there at the job site were like, hey, you need to take a break. I decided to go get myself checked out and see what was the deal.
The deal was Hughes was experiencing heat exhaustion, and on top of that, doctors discovered an underlying heart condition. Since then, he's lost 50 pounds and he hasn't had a problem with the heat.
Did you ever think that you'd be wearing this watch that would tell you what your core body temperature was and change your life?
No, but after wearing it and learning about it more, I'm glad I made the choice to wear it.
Wearing a solution for a workplace that keeps getting hotter. David Xtra, CBS News, McKinney, Texas.
Coming up next on Weather Extra is this week's Degrees of Science. In the latest episode, Brady Taylor had the opportunity to chat with a rip current expert from the National Ocean Service on how rip currents form and how to stay safe if you're ever caught in one. Their conversation is coming up right after the break.
Today we're talking to Dr. Greg Dusek. He's a senior scientist and oceanographer at the National Ocean Service. So Dr. Dusek, I guess for people that don't know, what exactly is a rip current?
Well, rip currents are seaward directed jets of water that can happen anywhere you have breaking waves, so all along the coastal U.S. and even in the Great Lakes. And they're typically maybe tens of yards wide. They can extend offshore up to 100 yards or more, so maybe the length of a football field or more. And they can reach speeds exceeding 5 miles per hour, which I know to most people probably sounds pretty slow, but your top Olympic swimmers average about 5 miles per hour. So even if you're a strong swimmer, that's something that can cause you a lot of problems. And as you mentioned, they're a huge public safety risk. Last year, we had at least 90 rip current drownings. That's kind of typical. We see over 70 every year in the U.S. And we think the number is probably even closer to 100 per year because some don't go documented. And, to put that in context, last year, rip currents were the second greatest weather-related fatality in the U.S., behind only heat. So ahead of flooding, ahead of tornadoes, ahead of hurricanes, rip currents were the second most weather-related fatality. So they're a huge public safety risk.
So is there a certain weather setup or ocean setup that makes these more prevalent to happen?
Well, the big thing with rip currents is because they're caused by breaking waves, it really comes down to what's happening with the waves. And usually what you're looking for are changes in how waves are breaking near shore. And so if you've been to the beach, you might have seen kind of shallower spots like sandbars close to the beach. Those sandbars can affect how waves are breaking and cause situations where you might have larger breaking waves kind of over a sandbar, and then deeper areas where you have less breaking, and that sets up this circulation, because where you have waves breaking, you're pushing water up on shore. You get higher water levels where you have those waves breaking more, less where you don't, and the water flows downhill, and so it flows towards those channels and then offshore, creating a rip current.
So when someone gets to the beach, is there anything that they can look to kind of see that may point out that there's a chance of a rip current?
When you first arrive at the beach, when you're ideally kind of removed from the water's edge at an elevated position like a beach access or a boardwalk, that's when you want to look for rip currents. And usually what you want to do is look actually for where waves aren't breaking, which sounds counterintuitive. But what you want to look for are kind of gaps in the lines of breaking waves. And sometimes there'll be dark spots. And those are those deeper locations often where you have rip channels and potentially rip currents. And then the other thing you can look for is like foam on the water's surface, because that'll get kind of sucked out to offshore, pulled offshore by a rip current. So lines of foam or even lines of sediment or debris in the water, those can potentially be indications of rip currents as well. But ultimately, the best thing you can do if you go to a lifeguarded beach is when you get there, if you're not sure, talk to the lifeguard. Lifeguards are experts at these things. They look for rip currents every day. So if you're not sure, ask them. They'll be able to tell you if there might be a rip current where you're swimming.
So if you're out in the water and you get caught by one of these rip currents, what's the best thing for someone to do if you're caught and get pulled out by this?
So the first thing what you don't want to do is just try to swim straight towards shore. Because as I mentioned, rip currents are moving really fast. Even if you're an Olympic swimmer, you could try swimming straight to shore and you might not make any progress. So you want to just stop, stay calm, and relax, as hard as that might seem to do. Because what ends up causing a lot of drownings is panic. People either try to swim straight to shore, start panicking, you tire yourself out, and then you have some problems. So relax, float, and kind of evaluate your situation. If you're a strong swimmer, what we tell people is, swim out of the current along the beach. So you swim along the beach till you kind of feel like you're not being pulled away from shore anymore, and then kind of back to shore at an angle away from the current, letting the breaking waves push you towards shore. If you're not a strong swimmer, or if you're not making a lot of progress, the best thing you can do is float. Rip currents don't suck you under the water, they just pull you away from shore. So if you can just float, stay on the water surface, wave, yell for help, that'll give a chance for someone to rescue you.
What should I do or somebody do in order to help these people that are caught in a rip current?
The first thing you want to do is take a few seconds and think. Don't just rush right into the water, because that's when you get yourself in trouble. So think, look for a lifeguard. The best thing you can do is if you see someone in distress, go get a lifeguard. If you're not on a lifeguarded beach, you want to call 911, because even if that person gets out, there's a chance they might need life-saving medical attention. And then after that, what you would ideally do is get them something that can float. So whether that's a boogie board, a surfboard, even a cooler, if you can get it to them, throw it to them without getting in the water yourself, that's always your best bet. And then if you have to go in, if it's really your only option, you need to have flotation, any sort of a flotation device, because again, rip currents don't pull you under the water, they're just pulling you away from shore. So if you have a flotation device, you will be okay.
To hear more about rip currents and how to stay safe if you or someone else is caught in one, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube, or head over to KWTX.com/degrees of science. Weather Extra returns right after this. Welcome back to Weather Extra. NASA says there's internal division on whether Boeing's Starliner spacecraft is safe to bring 2 astronauts home from the International Space Station. They arrived there in June for what was supposed to be a 1-week stay. CBS's Mark Strassman reports.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were supposed to spend 8 days in space. NASA now says they could spend 8 months.
Our chances of an uncrewed Starliner return have increased a little bit based on where things have gone over the last week or two.
Starliner has 2 unresolved issues: helium leaks and worries about small maneuvering engines that failed on the flight to the International Space Station. NASA's key concern: how that propulsion system will perform during critical phases of flight like undocking and the braking burn on the return to Earth. The small engines need to fire hundreds of times to keep the spacecraft in the precise orientation. Boeing is confident, but within NASA there's disagreement.
They're worried that we don't know for sure, so they estimate the risk higher, and they would recommend that we avoid coming home because we have another option.
That option? The next SpaceX mission to the ISS could launch with a crew of 2 instead of 4, leaving 2 empty seats for Wilmore and Williams to return next February. We asked NASA astronaut Nick Hague about the possibility of giving up his seat.
Ultimately, those are my colleagues up there, and there's nothing I want to see more than for them to come home safely.
Even if it means that your next trip to space gets delayed?
Absolutely.
NASA could make a decision critical to Starliner's future by late next week. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Now, if both of these astronauts remain in space until February, they will become part of the space station's official staff, which is currently 7 astronauts. NASA has also been sending additional food and other supplies to the International Space Station and can continue to do so. Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. We have another scorching hot week ahead, so stay safe out there. We'll see you again next weekend.